Okay. Shalom, everybody. Good evening. I'm Rabbi, I think you know me, but if you don't know me or you're seeing this later on YouTube, I'm Rabbi Julie Danan from Seaside Jewish Community. And this is the first of the 2024 Rabbi Seminar Series. By the way, I'm going to put in the chat while I'm thinking of it. I put it before, but for anyone who just came in, a link to the book of Esther online with it's on a website called Safaria that has all the Jewish books, the classics, all free online. In case you want to look at it and you don't have, if you have a copy of the Bible at home, then you can look at it there. So last year we started this rabbi seminar, and last year it was a little different. It was 5 weeks, basically, I think consecutively. Maybe we skipped 1 week, but it was about Jewish views of God, traditional views from the Bible through the Kabbalah. And at that time I said, I think next year we'll do something about modern Jewish views of God. But I'm gonna put that off a little. I hope we'll still get to that later. But for this year, for various reasons, I'm gonna stretch this program throughout the year. So several times during the year when a holiday is coming up, we will go deeper into the holiday, not like you did maybe in Hebrew school, where it's, we're talking on Purim about what the Hamantashen are, and what are the customs, what are the groggers, but a little bit of the deeper meaning, kind of the more rated mature audiences. So first I wanted to, I like to start with a little nigun. And the nigun is a wordless melody, but just gets us in the mood. And I think you're going to recognize this nigun. I'm not going to do the words because I don't really like the words, but I think you'll recognize it. And you can join in while you're on mute. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la, yeah, la 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 la, I la 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 la. So you know that. I like the part about right? We'll be happy and have Hamantashen, but not about the wicked, wicked guy. Okay. So we start with saying a blessing for the study of Torah. So oops, let me get this on the screen. Wait a second. I want to make sure I'm okay. Great. I don't know if you hear me, but I seem to have frozen, completely frozen. Oh dear.
You're okay.
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay, okay, we'll just have to wait a minute because my sharing is just like stuck.
We can hear you and see you.
Okay, because I look frozen to myself.
No,
Awkward.
we see you moving.
That's very strange. Okay, well, I can't share my screen right now. That is a problem. I hope it's gonna calm down. Okay. All right. I'm gonna try it one more time. I hope it works. Let's see. There we go. All right. I like to show you the full size, but sometimes when I do that, that's when I get the problems with this, the computer gets overloaded or something. So this tonight's topic is the book of Esther, the Megillah, the Megillah, the one we read on Purim. Does this book belong in the Bible? And by the end of the class, you're going to all vote up or down whether this book should be in the Bible. But first, we'll start with a blessing for the study of Torah. So let's do that. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Holy One of blessing, your presence fills creation. You've made us holy with your mitzvot, and you've commanded us to occupy ourselves with words of Torah. Amen. Okay. So I'm setting the stage. Imagine that you are not down in lower, slower Delaware, but you are on the coast of the Mediterranean in Yavne, a little town where the sages are not hiding out, but they're seeking refuge after the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in the year 70. It may be legendary a little bit, but according to the Talmud, about the year 90 of the Common Era, the remnant of these sages, having gathered to preserve Judaism, must decide which books are going to go into the biblical canon, what the Christians call the Old Testament, but we call the Hebrew Bible or the Tanakh. But some of the books are very controversial. And for example, Song of Songs, a lot of love poetry, a lot of talking about the beauty of a woman, the beauty of a man. And it doesn't mention God. And then there's Ecclesiastes, which we've studied before, which seems to, to not have a lot of belief or meaning in life, etc. But now we have the book of Esther. Should this book go in the Bible? Or is this book at least a sacred book at all? Is it sacred at all? Should it be included in the Tanakh? But I'd like to give you a quick review of what actually is the Tanakh. Because I don't assume that everybody knows it. Maybe a lot of you do know what it is, but I find that every now and then people haven't been able to learn about it before. So what Christians call the Old Testament, we prefer not to say that because it's not old. It's old, but it's not like, superseded by anything. It's the Tanakh or Hebrew Bible. And those three Hebrew letters, Tav, Nun, and Chaf, Sofit, that you see there, stand for the three parts of this Bible. The Torah, the 5 books of Moses, what we read in the synagogue out of the scroll. The Nun is for the Nevi'im, the prophets, which is all most of the historic and prophetic books of the Bible, where we get the Haftarahs from, the Judges and Joshua all the way through Isaiah and Ezekiel and so forth, what Jeffrey teaches about. And then finally, the third part is the Ketuvim. I know it's a Cha in Tanakh because it's at the end of the word, but at the beginning of the word, it's a Ka, a Kaf, Ketuvim, the writings. And these are kind of freestanding books, including the Psalms, the beautiful poems that we put in our prayers, the Proverbs, like the Woman of Valor that people might say on Sabbath, and the scrolls that we read at the festivals, such as we learned Ecclesiastes for Sukkot, and now the Megillah of Esther we read for this holiday. And it's important to remember that Tanakh is really a library of books written over centuries and bound together later on in one book. Okay, I'm going to step out for a moment from this screen share. Oh, it worked. Yeah. So that was just a little refresher of what the Tanakh is, but now we're going to consider if the book of Esther belongs there. But first I wanted to ask, you can show a show of electronic hands. You can do your little raise hand at the bottom of your screen. If you can't figure that out, you can just wave. And be honest, because you're not going to get like demerits. But how many people did read the book in advance of this class? How many people read it? Let's see, raised hands. We've got what? Yeah. Okay, we got some. Okay, a lot, but not everybody. And how many people have read it at some point? Like really read it, not just, heard this story in Hebrew school or something. You've read it before. Okay. So some have, not everybody, but I would encourage you afterwards. I put it in the chat, and I can put it one more time in the chat for anybody that came in late, that you can read it online. It doesn't take that long because it's 10 chapters and the last one's really short. And it's a fun read. But I'm going to give a little summary of it right now so we make sure we all know what is in the whole Megillah. Okay, so just a moment. I have to somewhat, let's see. Ooh, okay, I'm going to, sorry, it takes me a little while to find everything. It's just the realities, the beautiful realities of Zoom. I'm going to read a little summary of the book of Esther. And I'm reading it from, it's not very long, but it's just a review again for anyone that didn't have time to read it all, or you just need a review. And I'm taking this from the Encyclopedia of Jewish Women. I'm going to put that in the chat too. Let's see if I can do that. Chat, where are you? So that if you want to go read this later, you can, because it's a very nice article. Okay. But I'm going to read a little bit, not this whole page, but what it says about summarizing the book. Okay. In the biblical book named after her, Esther is a young Jewish woman living in the Persian diaspora who finds favor with the king, becomes queen, and risks her life to save the Jewish people from destruction when the court official Haman persuades the king to authorize a pogrom against all the Jews of the empire. Written in the diaspora in the late Persian or early Hellenistic period, around the 4th century before the Common Era, the Book of Esther is a Jewish novella that deals with the enduring issues of preserving Jewish identity and ensuring survival amid cultural pressures and hostile enemies in a foreign land. Esther first appears in the story as one of the young virgins collected into the king's harem as possible replacements for Vashti, the banished wife of King Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, he may be called Xerxes, we'll see about that. She's identified as the daughter of Abihail and the cousin and adopted daughter of Mordecai from the tribe of Benjamin. Not much is revealed about her character, but she is described as beautiful and obedient, and she appears to be pliant and cooperative. She quickly wins the favor of the chief eunuch, Haggai, and when her turn comes to spend the night with the king, Ahasuerus falls in love with her and makes her his queen. All this takes place while Esther keeps her Jewish identity secret. After Esther becomes queen, her cousin Mordecai becomes involved in a power struggle with the Grand Vizier Haman, the Agagite, a descendant of an Amalekite king who was an enemy of Israel during the time of King Saul. Mordecai refuses to bow before Haman, and this so infuriates Haman that he resolved not only to put Mordecai to death, but also to slaughter his entire people. He secures the king's permission to do this, and a date is set, the 13th of Adar, which is going to set up the date of when Purim will happen on the 14th of Adar. When Mordecai learns of Haman's plot, he rushes to the palace to inform Esther, weeping and clothed in sackcloth. And I'm gonna share this on the screen and maybe ask somebody else to read for a bit, so you don't just have to listen to me read. It's just a little bit more. Maybe I get Susan Aronson. Can you read this for us? Esther saves the Jews. Can you see that?
Esther saves the Jews from the plot against them. At this point in the story, Esther's character comes to the fore. When she first learns of Haman's plot and the threat to the Jews, her reaction is one of helplessness. On pain of death, she cannot approach the king without being summoned, and the king has not summoned her in 30 days, implying that she has fallen out of favor. However, following Mordecai's insistent prodding, she resolves to do what she can to save her people, ending with the ringing declaration, after that, I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. The pliant and obedient Esther has become a woman of action. Esther appears unsummoned before King Ahasuerus, who not only does not kill her, but promises to grant her as yet unarticulated request. In a superb moment of understatement, Esther asks the king to a dinner party. The king, accompanied by Haman, attends Esther's banquet and again seeks to discover her request, which she once more deflects with an invitation to another dinner party. Only at the second dinner party, when the king is sufficiently beguiled by her charms, does she reveal her true purpose, the unmasking of Haman and his plot. She reveals for the first time her identity as a Jew and accuses Haman of the plot to destroy her and her people. The volatile king springs to the defense of the woman to whom he was indifferent 3 days earlier. Haman is executed, and the Jews receive permission to defend themselves from their enemies, which they do with great success. The book ends with Mordecai elevated to the office of Grand Vizier and power now concentrated in the hands of Esther.
Okay, we'll stop there. So that's the story in case you needed a refresher. And also, you could raise your hand if you haven't heard the story for a while, if this telling of it was a little different than the way you learned it in Hebrew school or whatever. And if you want to write in the chat what was different, or for those who did read the story and did their homework, you can also write in the chat, were there things that surprised you when you went back and read the book? Anything that just surprised you that you kind of didn't realize, because maybe we gloss over those parts or we don't tell everybody. So I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say about that. Okay, we got some. What happened to Vashti? Well, we didn't. This retelling didn't really set up the very beginning when the king throws his big party. He has this huge drunken party. He wants to parade Vashti or show off Vashti to his guy friends. She's having a women's party in another part of the palace, and she refuses to come. So that's an affront to his male ego, and she's banished or whatever. They get rid of her, and then he has his so-called beauty contest. But you see, it's not exactly just a beauty contest. Okay. Yeah. And Vashti, I guess we won't go, well, we might end up talking about Vashti. She was a villain and the rabbis made her into really a villain. But I don't know, in the 1970s, suddenly she became kind of a feminist hero. She stood up to the king, right? I didn't know that Haman and his sons were impaled on a stake. Oh, yes. Well, it sometimes translated they were hung on a gallows. I think it's a matter of translation. I think it was like they were executed, then their body was impaled on the stake, like to show their body. And it wasn't that they were killed by being impaled, but I think they were killed by being hung. Okay. Why is God not mentioned in the Megillah? Good question. We're going to look at that. All right. Anyone else can put any other things that surprised you, but I'm going to now come back a little to the Megillah, because the way I've set up the class today is that I want to, we're taking about a third of the class, about 20 minutes to just introduce the book and review the book. And then I'll ask you about if this book should not be in the Bible, and we'll look at all the reasons it should not be in. Man, I hope I'll convince you that this book doesn't belong in the Bible. But then in the last third, we'll see the reasons the book should be in. Maybe it's really, really special and holy or important to our Jewish identity, especially today with all the things going on in the world. And then lastly, at the end of the hour, I guess we'll take a vote. And if we want to run over a few minutes to discuss, that would be lovely, but we'll try to keep it no more than an hour and 15 minutes tops. Okay. So back to my beautiful PowerPoint, because I love PowerPoints. Okay. Can I show it? I'm trying to, here, okay, there we go. Thank you. Okay. So what are the origins of the book of Esther? Esther describes events that occur after the Babylonian exile, which took place in 586 BCE. That's when the first temple was destroyed. The southern kingdom of Judah is conquered by the mighty Babylonian Empire, and Jews are exiled and they are settled in Babylonia and Persia, which is modern-day Iraq and Iran. And it is set during the reign of someone called Ahasuerus or Ahashverosh in Hebrew, possibly, I'm not sure exactly how to say this, Xerxes the First in Shushan or Susa, Persia. And I had a congregant who's Iranian back in California who said, it's a very, very special holiday. Purim is a really special holiday for the Jews of Iran because it took place right there, and people even visit the purported gravesite of Queen Esther. Based on languages and references, however, the book was probably written around the 3rd to 4th century before the Common Era. And it is the only biblical book not found in the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, apparently because the Dead Sea sect didn't know of it, or being a little bit uptight, they didn't recognize it as a sacred text. Okay, let's see what we got next. Okay. Now, one question is, what is the genre of Esther, the genre of the book of Esther? Actually, before I show you on the slide, I'd like to know what you think when you read the book of Esther. What is the genre? Because it's always important in literature, if I can remember my undergraduate degree in English literature, to know what genre you're talking about. Any thoughts about what kind of book this is? And if you want to say, I think if you're shy, you can write it in the chat. Otherwise, you could raise your little electronic hand, or you can just be bold and unmute and tell us what you. Anybody? Okay, Evie. Yeah.
Yeah. If it is based on truth, then it's historical fiction, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, historical fiction. I didn't even think of that one. Yeah. Well, that is, if it's historical fiction, it might be emphasis more on the fiction because it seems unlikely that it really, I mean, historians think it's very unlikely that it happened exactly as it's written. But I mean, I always, as a rabbi, like to say there must be a kernel of some truth in there. And as we'll see later, stories like Purim happened many, many times in Jewish history. And it certainly has the trappings of, the period in which it occurred. But yeah, historical fiction, I like that, or maybe like a historical romance or something. Stan or Carol?
I think it's a short story. It seems
A short story.
Yeah, a classical short
Okay.
story.
And I've got historical, maybe a parable. Interesting. I wonder what it's a parable about. A drama. Yeah, sometimes when you're on Netflix, it has, and you're looking at the genres, right? It'll say comedy/drama. And I'm always kind of wonder, what does that mean, comedy and drama? But maybe the book of Esther is that, because it has both comedy and some kind of dark comedy or dark.
They call it a dramedy on Netflix.
A dramedy. I love that. It's a dramedy. Okay. We usually retell and we do these Purim spiels where it's a satirical thing and we make a lot of jokes about it. But if we look at it as it is, and again, I'm looking a little bit at what the rabbi said in the Talmud and Midrash, but mostly trying to look at what it really is in the Bible. Yeah, maybe it's got some of that dramedy and or appears as historical fiction. So let's say what some other opinions are of what the genre is. So, okay, great. Adam, around year 2002, I don't know why, there were two really great articles that came out about the book of Esther. I guess it was having a moment. So Adam Gopnik wrote in the New Yorker that he, as an assimilated Jew, he was asked to give a talk about the book of Esther. He had no idea, and he went and spoke to, I think it was Ishmael Schwartz, the famous rabbi, the JTS, at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and this rabbi disarmed him by saying, well, obviously this book is a comedy. And that just changed his whole understanding, because he began to see the funny things in the book, or at least it's a farce, it's a burlesque. What are some of the comic moments? Anybody see any comic when you said it's a dramedy? What are the comic parts?
Yes. The very, very beginning, after Ahasuerus banishes Vashti, he says, "From this time forth, every man master in his own house shall be," which is a hilarious line. It's worthy of a mill. After his
Thank you. I was going to point that one out too, right? They're going to pass a rule that everyone has a law. All the wives must obey their husbands. And it's buffoonery, right? And of course,
totally.
he ends up being totally controlled by his wife. Yeah.
That's the funniest. I mean, it goes off to a funny start with that one.
Right. And
let's not forget about the plotters.
The plotters, is that funny?
Well, when we get it, it was.
When you do it, you can make it
fools,
funny, but it wasn't so funny. They were plotting to assassinate the king. How about when the king can't sleep and he decides to, have the records read to him in chapter 6, and he realizes that Mordecai had saved his life a while back. So then he says, well, who's around? Oh, Haman's around. Haman, how should I honor someone I wish to honor? Haman thinks, of course, it's him.
Right,
And he's
and
like, it's Mordecai, your arch enemy. You're going to honor him. So that's a kind of comic reversal, right? Okay. It could also be kind of like the 1001 Arabian Nights with Scheherazade, is someone who had to tell a story every night for 1001 nights, you know, to keep her sort of murderous, dangerous royal husband happy, and eventually he accepted her, but it's got a little bit of that quality. And we heard that maybe it's a novella or it's a short story. So Gershon Gorenberg, also writing in a really nice article in the Jerusalem Report in 2002, said it's the first Jewish novel. And if we would look closely at the text and have more time, we'd see that it uses some phrasing from the Bible, sort of in describing Esther's beauty and describing the palace, that is usually put to more pious uses in the Bible, and it kind of undermines them. And the story does have a lot of tension and drama and darkness. The knives are drawn in the royal court. Esther really does take a risk, not only that she might lose her life, but she might be totally shamed. And, you know, there's a lot of drama there. It contains conventional themes of ancient storytelling, biblical, but also Persian and Greek, the rivalry of courtiers, honor and shame, female charm saving the people, ethnic feuds, hidden identities, and the triumph of good over evil, says the Jewish Study Bible. Okay. Now, I don't want you to see this. Don't close your eyes. Okay. Okay, so we've had a nice review before and I went a little over on the review, but any questions in general about what we've said so far, just about the book itself before we start to vote? We got drama, historical, parable. Okay, any questions though about this introductory part? Anything you're not sure about? Okay, well then let's go to the next part of this shiur of this class, which is why the book of Esther does not belong in the Bible. So you are the sages at Yavne. We're sitting around. We've got all these scrolls that might be a bit mythical, but somehow there was a process of deciding what's considered holy writ. Why would Esther not be holy writ? I'd like to hear your answers, and you can also write in the chat if that's the way you prefer. So you can.
I'd like to take shot if I might.
Okay, Jeffrey, I bet you've got some good ideas. Okay.
First of all, God is not mentioned anywhere in the book of Esther.
Exactly.
Number two, it is, I believe, with the possible exception of Daniel, the only book in the Tanakh that does not take place at all anywhere in the land of Israel. Number three, it deals with two thoroughly, shall we say, assimilated characters. Esther and Mordecai are bastardizations of the name Ishtar and Marduk, who are the main gods of the Babylonians. Number four, it is basically a Scheherazade type story, because if anybody can tell me the difference between Haman and Jafar in Walt Disney's Aladdin, they're invited to my next Purim spiel. It ends with the Jews killing something like 150,000 Persians and whatever. It's got a perfectly ghastly, horrible, bloodthirsty ending, which has a totally terrible message. And last of all, there's no lessons. There's no outward lesson of spirituality of any kind, no kind of resolution. So for those reasons, it should be a Walt Disney novella and thrown out of the Tanakh.
That's it. I think we're done. It's out of here. You convinced me. I think you had a lot of things that I'm going to share. And yeah, it's got a lot of problems, right? And we'll look at some of those in more detail, but that was great.
Thank you.
And I don't know if that anybody wants to follow on that one, but does anybody else have thoughts about why this book seems ill-suited to the Hebrew Bible? And you can also just write it in the chat if you want. Carol.
It may be ill-suited because of all of the reasons you said, but it's a great story for us little Jewish girls.
Oh, okay. Okay, the strong female protagonist.
You know, wow, she saved her people. Little Esther. Oh, little Esther.
Oh, and you have a little Esther in your family. Yeah.
I do.
Right. How many girls have dressed up as Queen Esther? She was beautiful but brave too. Shelley, do you want to say something?
I wanted to follow up on Carol's point because you have a woman that is strong, and you know, the whole celebration is that Esther saved her people. And in terms of it doesn't belong because it's bloodthirsty, that argument doesn't hold for me, because there are a lot of places that are very bloodthirsty throughout the Tanakh. So
That's true. There's a lot of massacres happening in the Tanakh. That's right.
yeah, so
Including
there's
perpetrated by our tribe. Yeah.
yeah, so that doesn't hinder
Okay.
me from thinking that. And you know, I do think it's a place where women, you know, at least sneak in a strength, with strength. And so I think we squeak by with it.
Okay. Well, you're giving the reasons why it should be there. We're going to come to that, but how about more reasons it shouldn't be there, Deborah?
And for reasons that it should be there, is that there's so few women who are strong and take leadership. And in the Bible, there's Ruth, there's Esther, there's Deborah as the judge, but overwhelmingly the book really deals with the men. And so I think that Esther's role in saving the Jewish people is really quite phenomenal. She puts her own life at risk in order to save the lives of her people. And she does it in a like incrementally, really like a lot of smart thinking. And I think it's a wonderful story for Jewish girls and Jewish women. And so that's my bet.
Okay, well, hold some of the thoughts about what's good about it. We got to get a little into what's bad about it. And Jeffrey gave a lot of the points I'm going to share. I just want to note another genre, Jewish Hallmark movie. That's great. I like it. I found out that I have a distant, kind of not so distant cousin who grew up in Israel. She might be living in London right now. And I found out that her side job is that she writes historical romance novels. So this could also maybe be that. And it is one of the few books named after a woman, right? Ruth, Esther. Can you think of others? So that's special too. Okay, let's see if I had any other ones that weren't mentioned of why it should not be. No, why it's out of place in the Bible. Okay, we already said this. God is not mentioned at all. Now, the only other book where God is not mentioned is in the Song of Songs, that beautiful, and I don't know if it's exactly erotic, but it's very sort of softly erotic love poetry of the Bible, which was that Rabbi Akiva said it's the Holy of Holies, because it's talking about the divine love for, the people, but it's described in human terms. But anyway, it's not, God isn't mentioned. And even when you think that people are going to pray, does it say they pray? What does it say they do?
That they fast.
They fast. Now, it's true that fasting and praying went together, but why doesn't it say that they pray? Maybe because the book is so secular that even though they wanted to hint that they're praying, they couldn't really come out and say that.
There's the question of why are they fasting during Passover?
We're doing Passover? Was it in Passover? Well, I have to go back and read. I don't know. You'll find it for me and put the verse where you found it. I mean, we made some jokes that Esther had to fit back into her gown before she saw the king, but apparently it was for the purpose of, of prayer. The subject matter. There's, of course, this drunken party where the king's palace is described in terms that resonate with the description of the Holy Temple or the Mishkan, but instead it's his rich mansion, and he really has this, big drunken party. And what we were told growing up is the beauty contest, you know, kind of the Bess Meyerson of Persia, the first Jewish Miss America, was actually, if we look more closely at it, we'll see that, in fact, these young women were being taken to the harem, and it was like a trafficking in young women. And maybe we could actually look at that a little bit, okay, as unpleasant as the subject matter might be. So let me stop my share for a minute. I'm going to try to share with you where it talks about that. All right, here's Esther. Okay, sorry, I have to bring it up. Here we go. Click, click, click. Oh my gosh. All right. There you go. Okay, now I'm sharing the book of Esther with that link that I gave you. So in chapter 1, it's this drunken party. I mean, I used to have students, I had like a student kind of frat house type place in my backyard when I lived in California in a college town. So I'm not fond of drunken revelries. Okay, so after, you know,
Where does
after
the
Ahasuerus
where does the
kind of-
edict of drunken revelry come from in the first place?
Where does what?
Where does the tradition of getting drunk so you don't know the difference between Haman and Mordecai come from?
Yeah, it's interesting that getting drunk does not, you know, have good. It's when you read them getting drunk in the book of Esther in chapter 1, that's bad, right? But it's from the Babylonian Talmud and Tractate Megillah. I don't know. I was looking it up today. I think it was on page 7, either 7 or 13, that it says that you should get so drunk that you can't distinguish between curse Haman and bless Mordecai. In other words, if you want to get philosophical about it, you lose your sense of duality and a binary, and you don't know what's right or wrong. And then they even tell a kind of mythical story about some rabbis who get drunk, and one of them actually kills the other, but he's able to revive him. And the next year, the guy decides not to party with him anymore. So it's interesting, but that's not what we're looking at right now. All right. So the king, his servants say, well, here's a great idea. And does somebody want to read this? The king's servants who attended him said, from chapter 2, who'd like to read this? Just the English part. Anybody got a reader?
I'll read it.
Okay.
Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for your majesty. Let your majesty, appoint officers in every province of your realm to assemble all the beautiful young virgins at the fortress Shushan in the harem under the supervision of Hagi, the king's eunuch, guardian of women. Let them be provided with their cosmetics. And let the maiden who pleases your majesty be queen instead of Vashti. The proposal pleased the king, and he acted upon it.
Okay, and let's see, what was it like for these women at this so-called beauty contest? We'll go down a little bit. Okay, here a little bit. She's keeping her identity secret. Important to note. Okay, now in verse 12, when each girl's turn came.
When each girl's turn came to go to King Ahasuerus,
King A, we just call him King
end
A.
of 12 months treatment prescribed for women, for that was the period spent on beautifying them, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfume and women's cosmetics. And it was after that the girl would go to the king. Whatever she asked for would be given her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace.
Keep going.
She would go in the evening and leave in the morning for a second harem in charge of Shagas, the king's eunuch, guardian of the concubines. She would not go again to the king unless the king wanted her, when she would be summoned by name.
So this is either a really terrible male fantasy of all, he has these endless virgins that he's sleeping with, and then they can only come back at his request. It's his harem. or what? Or it is really a very sad story about the trafficking of women. And some women today, modern women, have made the fast of Esther and this time of year a time to bring attention to the trafficking of women, because of that's what happened to Esther in a sense, right? Although things ended up differently for her. But what about all those other girls in the harem? All right, let's see some of the other reasons we should get rid of this book, because we got to go on to some other stuff. Okay. All right. Let me get back. Oh, it keeps taking me back to the beginning. Sorry. Okay, why it's not in the Bible. Yes, as Jeffrey already mentioned, Mordecai and Esther's names are kind of based on Marduk and Ishtar, you know, these Persian gods, and that's even recognized in the Talmud, at least Ishtar. There's an ethnic rivalry. Why did Mordecai really refuse to bow down? We're going to look into that a little more in detail in just a moment. Okay. There's violence. We mentioned the terrible violence in chapter 9. And in fact, the Shalom Center in Philadelphia, Rabbi Arthur Waskow's organization, published a book this year, Alternative Versions of Chapter 9, in which the Jews take their revenge. And there was an article either in the Forward or the JTA about how Jews might be struggling with this idea of revenge, especially with the war that's going on right now. And should be seen as a war of revenge, as a war of self-defense, but these questions come up. What do you do when your enemy does something terrible? Do you take revenge? Do you want to take revenge? And then, of course, it's the whole celebrations, kind of secular, kind of a Jewish Mardi Gras. It's a very universal type of celebration. So the first thing is Jewish family values. Again, some of the negatives. I'm running over a little, so I'm going to keep it kind of short. But what kind of good Jews are these? You know, even though the Midrash will paint them as pious Jews, no. In fact, they're named for Ishtar and Marduk, although Esther does have a Hebrew name, which is Hadassah. And we know the Hadassah organization that has Hadassah Hospital, and we have a chapter of Hadassah, was founded by Henrietta Zold on Purim. She had some ladies over for a Purim celebration, and they founded Hadassah. Okay. Just to make it spicier, although I'm trying not to bring in too much Talmud, but the Talmud actually says that Mordecai and Esther were married. I'll just let that sit there. I don't know if they were just, you know, one rabbi said that. I don't know if he was trying to make it a spicier story or, but he said well, I don't want to go into the details, but that's what, the Hebrew details. Esther is conscripted in this beauty contest with cousin Mordecai's blessing. She's kind of his window into the palace. He's a court Jew. He's hanging around. He's, you know, he's trying to get a little power, and she's his gal on the inside. We read about this beauty contest. Okay, not very nice. And then there's an identification of Esther with Sarah, the first Jewish matriarch, because it's repeated in the story a couple of times that Ahasuerus ruled over like 127 provinces, and that was the age of Sarah, when she died. She lived to be 127 years old. And in Genesis, Sarah herself was taken to the chambers of a Gentile king, and her own husband, Abraham, did not really protect her properly, although she's saved by divine intervention. Okay, so not a great book for Jewish family values. And now, last year at the Jewish, maybe you guys want to sing a little bit of Jews Don't Bow Down.
We Jews don't bow. We Jews don't bow. We Jews don't bow.
Okay, so you know, I grew up, and when I was learning about, and I bet a lot of you too, when I was learning about the book of Esther, when it came to chapter 3 and Mordecai won't bow down to Haman, we were told, why would he not bow down? Anybody can answer. What's the usual answer that's given?
Is anybody else going before me? Because I'll shut up.
I'll try.
All right. The usual reason is that Jews only bow to God, and they will not bow down to a human being, which is not true.
It's not true. We see throughout the Bible that people bow down and
Well,
prostrate themselves.
Jews yield to authority. Right. You want the real reason, or should I
Well,
shut
I'm
up?
going to show you right now what I think is the real
Oh.
reason. If you disagree, you can
All right.
chime in, or if you want to add to it. I hope I got everything there. But, so Midrash tries to say, okay, the reason he wouldn't bow down is because Haman was wearing a little idol around his neck. And if he bowed to Haman, he'd be bowing to the idol. That's pretty fictitious. But it seems instead that there's a little ethnic rivalry and grudge going on. And you know what? I didn't really see this at all until the first time I studied this book with a Christian group, a church group, and they really brought this forth. And I think, wow, as Jews, we hadn't really talked about this when I was growing up. So, more proof that Jews do bow down is in chapter 8, verse 1. Esther throws herself at the king's feet and basically grovels and bows to him, begging, for him to save her and the Jews. So we know people do bow down. So Haman is descendant of Agag, an Amalekite king. The Amalekites are Israel's worst enemies. And I gave you the citations. I just feel that due to trying to keep this class, not too long, I would read these to you. But if you come to synagogue this week, we will read from the book of Deuteronomy because it's Shabbat Zachor. And it says, never forget that these Amalekites, your arch enemies, chased you down when you were leaving Egypt, and they hurt the weakest among you and the stragglers in the rear. And when you get a chance, wipe them out and destroy them, basically. Okay, now that's a very problematic sentiment, isn't it? And rather violent, although Jews, different rabbinic teachers throughout history would say, oh, it doesn't mean that. It means it means wipe out baseless hatred. It means conquer your inner Amalek, but originally it seems to mean that. So Mordecai and Esther are described in their genealogy as descendants of Saul. And in this week's Haftarah, which is from the book of 1 Samuel, Saul, the first king of Israel, fails to kill an Amalekite king, Agag, after he'd won a battle against the tribe. And Shmuel, the prophet, does kill Agag, but apparently somewhere in there, Agag managed to father a child that would be the line of Haman. So we have now got a whole ethnic grudge going on. And there's allusions that, because of what Saul did, the kingship went to David. It went to a different tribe from Benjamin to Judah. And in this story of Esther, it's like when Esther becomes queen, it's like she's taken back the crown to the line of Saul. It must have been someone from the family of Saul that wrote this story. Okay, so that's that's a little bit of a deep dive. I think, again, if we were doing a longer text study, we'll look up all those texts. But since this is being recorded, you can get them, or I can send you the citations if you want to look them up, or you can come to Shul and hear some of them. So basically, Jews do bow down, and we're seeing a little bit of an ethnic grudge. And is that a nice thing? So you've heard a bunch of reasons why Esther should not be in the Bible. How many people are already convinced it should not be in the Bible? Please raise your hand, electronically or really. Or at least thinking there's a good case it should not be in the Bible. Okay, some people are starting to be won over to the idea it should not be in the Bible. So now we're going to see if we can turn it around. Why should the book of Esther, yes, be in the Bible? Why do you think? And if, please, you can answer or you can write it in the chat. Okay, David, what do you say?
So the obvious answer is, why change a good thing? It's in the Bible. We celebrate every year. It's one of the 2 holidays that we celebrate where we get to actually have a good time, no holds barred. And why change it?
Well,
I'm not
mean,
asking for
yes, if we were saying right now we're
rebuttal.
going to take it out of the Bible, yes, we shouldn't do that. But I'm saying let's go back to the year 90 of the Common Era. Like if you were making the original decision, should it have gone in? Okay. By the way, the book of Esther has been problematic. Do you remember in the 1990s, there was a Jewish guy in Hebron named Baruch Goldstein who on Purim perpetrated a massacre against Palestinians because he said they were Amalek, and he was trying to fulfill, he had kind of, do you remember that in the news?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is how, when you read things, it can lead you in the wrong direction. Of course, not a normal person who's mentally stable would not think like that. But if someone becomes a religious fanatic, and they're interpreting things in a very, twisted way, they could get that lesson if they read the book, and not as a comedy, not as a dramedy, but as some kind of a commandment for them to do something to kill the other tribe. All right. So other reasons it should be in, besides it's already in and it's really fun and we need to have a good time.
Can I take a shot at this since I did the other side?
Okay, let Susan give one and then we'll come.
Oh,
I
we
bet
got
you've got a
somebody else.
bunch of them.
Well,
Aronson.
I think it should be in there. And I think from the way we heard the story as kids, where Vashti was really evil or wicked and Esther was the heroine, Vashti was really a heroine. She really set the stage for women's liberation, I think, because she refused to dance before the Haman's cohorts, and he wanted her to dance Ahasuerus, dance naked in front of them, and she refused to do so. And so I think she was, one of the first Jewish heroines. The other thing that is, I think, important is that women have names in this book, and there are so many nameless women in the Bible. They're referred to as somebody's wife or somebody's sister, but don't have a name of their own. And so I think that's another important reason. Okay, so I'm going to definitely add this if I ever teach this class again, that this whole idea of it as a woman's story with a strong woman protagonist, another woman who you could see as a heroine. I wouldn't say she was Jewish. I mean, but Vashti, but she's a heroine in a Jewish book, or a hero, a female hero. And why do you say she's going to dance naked? I just want to make that clear. It doesn't exactly say she'll dance naked, but it said she's supposed to appear in the royal crown. So the sages said, and nothing else. That's a bit of an addition. Okay. But even if she wasn't going to appear buck naked, she would still, for her in those days to go in, or even to anyone today, to go, walk in front of a bunch of drunken men would be very inappropriate. Maybe the next day the king would then blame her and get mad at her that she did that.
But there's another aspect to it.
Yeah.
Which is that you don't remain silent when evil appears. And I think one of the teachings of the book of Esther is the courage to actually step up, even at the risk of your own life, to protest when there's evil in the land. And I think that's a very good thing to have in the Bible. I think it's a good teaching for all of us, actually. Not to be silent. So I find that while it's not overtly spiritual or overtly, but I find there is a moral aspect to it, which I think is very appealing.
Okay. There's a lot of human agency, right? Because we'll see, we're coming up on Passover in a month. On Passover, God does all the miracles for us, and the plagues, and splits the sea, and the Haggadah does not even say Moses' name or barely mentions him in passing, a traditional one. And here it's all human beings have to take agency, like you're saying, and they have to stand up, and they can't just try to save themselves. They have to speak up, like Esther has to speak up. So let's now look at some of the reasons why it should be in. Oh, we got something else in the chat. Oh, good point, Susan. Yeah, Susan, you had a lot of great stuff. And in fact, I took this opportunity to add that as because y'all thought of something I didn't, which is the Okay, we're going to start it from the current slide. Okay, I don't know. I can't get to start from the current slide, but here we go. Yes, Esther does belong in the Bible because of what you just said about the strong women. And I've just heard that throughout the evening. That it's a book about with a woman. You know, I could see Gal Gadot in the leading role. And by the way, Gal Gadot just had her 4th daughter and believes in, you know, powerful women, the Jewish Amazons. Okay. Themes, it has a lot of themes of Jewish diaspora history. We're going to look at that in just a moment. And then there's some more spiritual things. If you want to work with me, you could take, if you're more of a spiritual bent, that God is hidden and is working through human actions. And finally, that it represents a whole different kind of holiness. So let's take a little time to look at some of these themes. So the first, we've already really, everybody talked about the women. So thank you. We kind of covered that. But this book resounds with themes of diaspora Jewish history. Of course, there's a theme of anti-Semitism and baseless hatred. I mean, because Haman doesn't like one Jew, he wants to kill all the Jews. And the king is just lazily willing to do it. Many communities had their own special Purims, and the Encyclopedia Judaica notes there were at least 100 individual Purims celebrated by different Jewish communities around the world when their own community went through something similar, where they were threatened and they were saved at the last minute. Of course, they weren't always saved, but when they were saved, they celebrated. Throughout history, some Jews have assimilated into the highest echelons of Gentile society, only to be confronted with the need to face their identity and destiny as Jews. As it says in chapter 4, Mordecai says to Esther, "Imagine not that you shall escape in the king's house more than all the Jews." And in fact, in the Talmud, it also says that the king removing his ring was more effective than the words of all the 48 male prophets and 7 female prophets in getting Jews to identify as Jews. And I think that's so relevant right now. How many Jews now? I'm going to stop this share for a minute just to think about this, really let this sink in. That how many Jews since October 7th have gotten more identified Jewishly? Have you personally, if you want to raise your hand or write in the chat or wave, if you've done more Jewish, some more extra Jewish thing because of October 7th? Anybody? Okay, I've got at least one. More, 2, 3, 4. And I think that I'm hearing about many, many people that are doing that, because when we're faced with anti-Semitism, we sometimes it makes us want to be more Jewish. The role of the Jew. Now, this was interesting in the article I shared from this Jewish woman's archive, if that was the correct name. I'm not sure now it's the correct name. I might have written it wrong, but I gave you the link. The role of the Jew in the diaspora was feminine, as in not having overt power, but having to use one's persuasion, wit, and talent to gain success. And we can see the other stories of court Jews, such as Joseph in Egypt, Daniel in Babylonia, etc. You know, if you saw the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, I think one of the women says, "Oh, the man is the head of the house. The man is the head of the house. The woman is the neck, but the neck controls the head." Okay, Harvey or Alan, do you want to say anything? You raise your hand. Go ahead and say something if you want.
Sorry.
Did you just accidentally raise your hand, or do you want to say something?
No.
Okay, so I think I have this. Yeah, I think it's the Jewish. Okay, well, whatever. Let's not get hung up on that. Okay, continuing. Especially in America is what I want to say. Especially American Jews could identify with this story, whether you're a religious Jew or you're a secular Jew or somewhere in between. Does anyone remember this book? Charles Silberman wrote a book in 1985, A Certain People, American Jews and Their Lives Today. Anybody, if you have read that book back in the day, you want to wave, or anybody read it? I remember it well. He based the title on Haman's words to describe the Jews in a negative way in chapter 3, but he made it positive. We are a certain people. And somebody, maybe somebody want to read? There's a striking parallel. Read from there. Carol, Ash.
There is a striking parallel between the book of Esther's legend of salvation, the capital city of Susan rejoices, and the post-World War II experience of American Jews who have moved from the periphery of American society into its mainstream. Recently, Franklin Foer published an article in the New Yorker, "The Golden Age of American Jews is Ending Due to Anti-Semitism on the Right and Left." How do you think Silberman's message sounds today?
Okay, just to show you that I was rushing in, made that error. It was in the Atlantic, not in the New Yorker. Okay, I'll fix that. The article is in the Atlantic. Did anybody read it? It's very, very long, and it's all about anti-Semitism. It's depressing.
What part is the
Okay, so we're gonna correct it that it's in the Atlantic. It's depressing, but you know, some critics have said, well, there is more anti-Semitism, but it is coming from certain extreme corners of both the right and the left, and not maybe mainstream Americans, but that doesn't mean that it's not threatening. It is, yes. I'm just going to fix it to say the Atlantic because this is going to be recorded.
I think
Go ahead.
I think that the way in which the anti-Semitism is emerging these days is still hidden in microaggressions.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, in this story, you can see it totally out there. I mean, here's the good guys, here's the bad guys. It's
right.
It's a very easy story, and we can get
Yeah.
behind that. And that, I mean, it's kind of why it's popular. It's, but life is a little more difficult than that.
Yeah. Right. I mean, some of the anti-Semitism is really very blatant, but it can also be very subtle. Yeah. David.
Yeah. So my view about Silberman's perspective is that he's sort of guilty of historicity. I mean, he's well, it's a form of historicity where you're not really looking at real history. You're looking from the perspective of what you're living through. And quite frankly, if you look historically, anti-Semitism has been around for a long time. It has been at the moment when Jews have have ascended in society. At that very moment tends to be when historically anti-Semitism rises in its worst form. It's happened multiple times in history.
I'm sorry. You're not talking about Charles Silberman's, you're talking about Franklin Foer's new article.
No, I'm talking about Silberman's perspective, writing about the post-war American Jews.
Okay.
That this was one of those times in history when probably because of the Holocaust more than anything else, and because the United States happened to be a democracy at the time, that American and the U.S. Became a world power, that American Jews tended to rise and also to assimilate to a very great degree. It's anti-Semitism historically tends to come at the moment when Jews are seen to be on the ascendancy.
Interesting. And you're a historian, so I think you could speak to this a lot more than I can. Indeed, I guess I'm pointing to this as an American Jewish phenomena that there was a certain identification of us with that story of diaspora success, so to speak, right? And the reality of the anti-Semitism. Okay, now again, just so I don't want to take too long. You see, I have lots more to say about why it should be in the Bible, but not a lot of time to say it in. So I'm going to just give a taste of these more spiritual things. This could almost be another class, or this could be a 3-hour class, but it's not. So one thing is that God is another reason this book should be in the Bible, certainly according to many Jewish spiritual teachers, is that God is hidden in this book of Esther. I think David was the one who said that. Were you the one that said that human beings are God's agents of redemption? Basically, we're, or no, Stan was saying that, right? That this book is teaching us an important lesson, that we have to stand up and we have to not wait for God. We have to do the things, right? And you can see in the celebration they have, it's not just a Mardi Gras. It is a time when people share, when we're supposed to give to the poor, give food to one another, feed one another, tell the stories together, and support one another in community. That's, matanot levunim, giving to the poor. So we could say God is hidden in this book. God is not mentioned, but our Jewish mystics will say, but God is hidden, because the word Esther, the very name Esther, is related to the name for Nistar or Hester, hidden. And in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 31, there's a saying that God says, I will hide myself on that day of when, the anti-Semites are persecuting you. Hester, Astir, I will surely hide my face. And those words are another version of Esther. So it's a hint to the mystics that God is hiding in the story. We could even say that wearing the masks reflects God's hiddenness. And there's other things from Midrash. I won't go into all of them. You could read them, but some Megillot, including I believe the one that we use, that Larry Crever loaned us, are called Megillot HaMelech, because they have the words "the king" at the top of each column, to hint that there's a certain identification of that there's a certain hiddenness of God in the book of Esther as the king. And there's other hints that the mystics tried to find, but if you want to know more about them, you can ask me, because we don't have enough time. But Purim is coming before Passover. God is revealed, and you could say that really that's better than God being hidden. But if you look at the cycle of the holidays starting in Passover and ending with Purim, because that's the cycle of the year, that Purim is the crown of the holidays. So the Midrash says, at the time when Jews this is also the time when Jews really accepted the Torah, because at Sinai, it wasn't totally voluntary. The Midrash says that God's like, do you accept the Torah? Fine. And if not, I'm just going to drop the Mount Sinai on your heads. They were under the mountain, it says, literally. Or, of course, that's mythical, but the idea that they weren't totally free will, they were just escaped slaves. And now, as people who are in a world where God is hidden, in a way, we accept the covenant more freely. Okay. And then the last reason that maybe Purim the book of Esther does belong in the Bible is because Purim, the holiday that stems from this book, is a very holy day, but in a different way than other holidays. And let me just go into that. Purim is sometimes said compared to Yom Kippur. How can that be? David Hirschler shared a beautiful drash that one of his late rabbis told about it. But many rabbis have pointed out that what is the name of Yom Kippur in Hebrew is Yom Kippurim, and that literally means a day like Purim. How can Yom Kippur be like Purim when one is the most solemn fast and one is this raucous and happy feast? So just to say how that can be. Well, it was a day of awe and trembling, and there was fasting, because there is a fast called the Fast of Esther prior to the Feast of Purim. There is some of the same themes play out on Yom Kippur as on Purim. For example, Purim means lots. These lots are thrown by Haman to decide the day he's going to get rid of the Jews. And in the story that we read in the Torah for Yom Kippur, the scapegoat is chosen by Lot. And the story of Jonah, there is a use of lots of they're going to be thrown into the, not the sea, but the SEAC. Okay. On Yom Kippur, we achieve greater consciousness through fasting and prayers. And on Purim, we achieve a kind of expanded consciousness through celebration and humor, and nahafochu, seeing things upside down, drinking, which of course can be very problematic for, there's been a lot said about that, but it was only supposed to blur the dualities of curse Haman and bless Mordecai. We even change our very identity with costumes. Both holidays point to a greater divine reality and unity. The Midrash teaches that even in the Messianic age, when all is perfect, when we don't need the messages of the festivals anymore to sustain us, Purim will remain the highest kind of holiness, finding God in joy and celebration. So maybe this book that seems so secular is a book about human agency. It's a book about women assuming power. It's a book about God being hidden in human actions. And it's a book where we can find awe and wonder and seeing outside our usual framework, either through fasting and prayer, like on Yom Kippur, or through rejoicing and humor and all the things that we do on Purim. So just my last slide here, then we'll take the responses is, so how does Esther speak to you? And of course, should this book be in the Bible? We're going to take the vote in a minute, but David, what did you want to add?
So I just wanted to add on something to the point that you mentioned that this former rabbi in his drash. The point he was bringing up was that we wear masks on Purim, but on Yom Kippur we are unmasking ourselves.
Yeah, because
that's the day when we are publicly acknowledging collectively what all of the things that we shouldn't have done during the course of the year. So a lot of it had to do with the masking and unmasking. That's where the contrast.
Yeah, that's a beautiful drash. I mean, that was his unique take on this story, but that comparison has been, I don't know who first came up with it, so I'd have to look that up, but it's been brought up before. Yeah. And, some people cynically said, well, on Purim, we dress up, Jews dress as Gentiles, but on Yom Kippur, we dress up as Jews, as pious Jews. We act more pious than we really are, but your rabbi said, no, you show who you really are. Okay, so let's take a vote. First of all, just take a vote. I wish I had the poll. There's like an app where you can do a poll, but we're just going to do it by show of hands. And maybe you can help me count them. How many people think this book should not be in the Bible? Please raise your hand. Preferably electronically, because it'll be easier. Only if you think it should not be, retrospectively, not today. Okay, so I've got 1, 2, 3. I'm going to the next page. No more page. We're all on one page. Okay, only a couple of people say no. Now, how many people think it should, yes, be in the Bible? It should be in the Bible. Wow, I think Esther has all the fans. It's almost unanimous. Just a couple of people said no. Most of us say, yes, this book does belong in the Bible. So even though we're getting to 8:15, if anybody would like to say now that we studied and discussed it, and you've heard all these different perspectives, why do you think it belongs in the Bible? And any last thoughts of why it belongs in the Bible that we haven't said? And some people still have your hands up. I think you were just voting. You can take your hands down if you were just voting. Anybody, any thoughts? Have we just said it all about this story? Well, yes, Jeffrey.
Esther speaks uniquely to American Jews in an assimilated society. Let's just start with the fact that Esther and Mordecai are named after are named after pagan deities, and Esther has two names, a common name and a Hebrew name, like so many do. It's a story really of Jews in a completely, almost, you can almost see that they're trying to swim as very assimilated Jews in a society that's really not far from their own, where there's power struggle, there's sexism, there's trafficking, there's alcohol abuse, and you can really do a whole drosh on the Book of Esther, search for Jewish identity, and the maintenance of Jewish identity in the diaspora, which when you really drill down, it's not terribly far from our own, although they didn't have cell phones.
I think that's true. I think some of the issues are coming up right now. Some people are like, I want to hide my Jewish identity. And others are like, no, I'm wearing my Magen David because I want to be a Jew loud and proud, and I want to tell everybody who I am.
Esther has to hide her Jewish
identity. She has to hide it.
And then in this 3 days of struggle, she finally recovers her Jewish identity.
Right? Yes.
Heroically. I mean, like any heroine out of Shakespeare or anything else, she says, now I've got to act. But before that, she'd hid her Jewish identity.
Right. That's a discovery of Jewish identity. That's a very good reason to have it, right? And it's more of Jewish identity in a world in which there are not overt miracles, in which there are dangers, in which there is anti-Semitism. And you don't know how things will turn out, but to assume your identity, to be courageous, and as so many of the women tonight have said, for women to be courageous and assume that power. Okay, please talk about the massacre. Oh, darn. Okay. Esther's with it. Oh, so that closing massacre, at the end, when the Jews, the king says, well, it's not that I can just cancel the decree, but you can defend yourself. So they defend themselves, okay, but then they go and slaughter thousands of people. The only thing that I could actually say about it from the academic point of view is that first of all, most academics view this book as fictional. If it's historic fiction, it's much more fiction than history. And they see this as very exaggerated numbers, wish fulfillment of these people that were people who were, powerless, a powerless minority, and how they wish they could take revenge on their enemies, but they really were not able to. That's been my kind of rationalization in the past. But as I said, some people have not seen it like that, and it has actually even led to violence in our own time. So let me just see if there's the last thing on the Shalom Center, if they have published this alternative. I'm going to put this in the chat. It's called the Chapter 9 Project, and you can go and get it from the Shalom Center, in which people rewrote Chapter 9, which is the more violent chapter, and they different people wrote different, kind of a modern midrashim on how it could have a less violent ending. And that is very pertinent too, because we're dealing with the conflict in the Middle East and the continual attacks, the terrible attack on Jews on October 7th and the war that's going on right now, but just also the many, many wars and the violence that's been going on, and what kind of peaceful alternatives could be found. And lastly, I was just going to say that the Bible, to me, the Tanakh, is like a whole of human experience. So if we leave out one thing, we would be leaving out crucial human experiences. There are pious parts, there are inspirational parts, there are laments and sadness, there are questions about why things happen, and there's wisdom. And here there is the world, kind of like the real world, the world where things are hidden, the world where we have to take risks, and the world where a simple girl could end up being not only the queen, but a heroine. And so without a little and I'm going to, that's the Chag Purim song. I'm gonna stop the recording, and you could feel free, if you're not in a hurry, to stick around and chat some more. But where do I end the recording? Okay. Stop the recording. Okay, got it. Yes.